It was Thursday, September 19th, 2024. Just another Family Feud taping at the Atlanta studio. The lights were bright, the audience was energized, and Steve Harvey was in his element, cracking jokes between the Johnson family from Ohio and the Roberts family from California. But then, during a routine camera pan across the audience, something happened that would become one of the most powerful moments ever captured on the show. His smile faded. His joke stopped mid-sentence. And for 5 full seconds, live on camera, Steve Harvey just stared at a woman in the third row, his eyes filling with tears. What nobody in that studio knew was that this woman had saved Steve's life 27 years ago, and he had spent nearly 3 decades trying to find her. The day started like any other Family Feud taping. Steve arrived at the studio at 6:30 in the morning, went through hair and makeup, reviewed the questions with his production team, and did his usual prayer before the cameras rolled. He'd been hosting Family Feud since 2010, and by 2024 he'd filmed thousands of episodes. The routine was second nature to him. Walk out, greet the families, ask the questions, deliver the punchlines, move on. But this day would be different. This day would crack open a part of Steve's past that he'd locked away, a part that still woke him up at night, a part that reminded him why he did what he did. The Johnson family and the Roberts family were both lovely, energetic groups. The Johnsons had come all the way from Cleveland, a family of teachers and nurses. The Roberts family from San Diego consisted of 3 generations, including an 82-year-old grandmother who kept making Steve laugh with her quick wit. Everything was going smoothly. The Johnsons were winning, the audience was engaged, and Steve was doing what he did best, turning ordinary moments into entertainment gold. But then came the moment that changed everything. It happened during the 3rd round, right after a commercial break. The camera operator, following standard protocol, was doing a slow pan across the audience to capture reactions. Steve, standing at his podium, was shuffling his question cards and bantering with the families. Then he glanced up at the monitor that showed what the cameras were seeing, and he froze. Steve's question cards slipped from his hands and scattered across the floor. The studio went quiet. The families looked confused. The production team started to worry something was medically wrong. But Steve couldn't speak. He was staring at a woman with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. The woman in the 3rd row seemed equally frozen, her hand covering her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. They were locked in some silent communication that nobody else understood. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was really only about 10 seconds, Steve found his voice. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Ma'am, in the 3rd row, the floral dress, could you please stand up?" The woman slowly rose to her feet, trembling. The audience was dead silent now. Everyone could feel that something profound was happening, but nobody knew what. "What's your name?" Steve asked, even though something in his bones already knew the answer. "Dorothy," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper but picked up by the studio microphones. "Dorothy Chen." Steve Harvey. The man who made his living with words, who could fill any silence with humor or wisdom, stood there unable to speak. His eyes were glistening with tears, and his jaw was working like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. "Excuse me," Steve finally managed, turning to his producers. "Stop everything. Stop the cameras. Stop the taping. I need a moment." But his senior producer, who had worked with Steve for over a decade, saw something in his face and made a different decision. "Keep rolling," she whispered to the camera operators. "Keep rolling on everything." Steve walked away from his podium, leaving the confused family standing there. He walked toward the audience, his eyes never leaving Dorothy Chen's face. As he approached, Dorothy started crying harder, and Steve's own tears were now flowing freely. "Is it really you?" Steve asked when he reached her row. "After all these years, is it really you?" Dorothy nodded, unable to speak through her sobs. "It's me, Mr. Harvey. It's really me." And then Steve Harvey did something he'd never done in 14 years of hosting Family Feud. He climbed over 2 rows of audience members, stepped on people's feet, apologized profusely, and embraced this woman like she was family he hadn't seen in decades. After a long moment, Steve pulled back, still holding Dorothy's shoulders, looking at her face like he was memorizing every detail. "I looked for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For 27 years, I looked for you. I hired investigators. I posted on social media. I offered rewards. I never stopped looking. Dorothy was shaking her head, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I know, she said softly. I saw some of the posts, but I didn't want to be found. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. The confusion in the studio was palpable. The families at the podiums were watching this unfold with bewilderment. The audience members were whispering to each other, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Steve turned to face the cameras, his arms still around Dorothy. I need to tell you all a story, he said, his voice stronger now, but still emotional. A story I've never told on television before. A story about this woman right here who saved my life when I was at my absolute lowest point. This story starts in 1996 in Cleveland, Ohio, during the worst year of my life. Steve guided Dorothy down from the audience seating, and the production team quickly set up 2 chairs on the stage, abandoning the game show format entirely. The families were invited to sit in the audience, and everyone settled in to hear what Steve Harvey needed to say. In 1996, Steve began, sitting across from Dorothy on the stage. I was 40 years old and I was homeless. Not between apartments homeless, not crashing on a friend's couch homeless. I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo, washing up in gas station bathrooms, and seriously considering giving up on my dreams entirely. The studio was silent. Everyone knew Steve had struggled early in his career, but few knew the details. I'd been doing stand-up comedy for about 9 years at that point, Steve continued. I'd played every small club, every dive bar, every corporate event that would have me. I was good at what I did, but good wasn't paying the bills. I was divorced, behind on child support, and so broke that I had to choose between eating and putting gas in my car. Dorothy reached over and squeezed Steve's hand. He smiled at her gratefully and continued. I was doing a week of shows at this little comedy club in Cleveland. They paid $150 for the week, which wasn't enough to get a hotel room and eat, so I just stayed in my car. I'd park in different places each night, trying not to attract attention. One night, it was February. Absolutely freezing, I parked behind this church on the east side. I figured it was safe and maybe I could sneak in to use the bathroom before the service started in the morning. Steve's voice grew quieter, more vulnerable. That night, I sat in that freezing car, wrapped in every piece of clothing I owned, and I made a decision. I decided that if I couldn't make it as a comedian by the end of the month, I would give up. I would go back to whatever factory job would have me, stop chasing this stupid dream and just be a normal person. I prayed that night. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. I asked God to give me a sign, to show me if I should keep going or if it was time to quit. The emotion in Steve's voice was affecting everyone in the studio. Some audience members were openly crying now. The next morning I woke up to someone tapping on my car window. I was terrified. I thought it was the police or worse, someone trying to rob me. But when I looked up, I saw this woman. He gestured to Dorothy. She had a thermos of hot coffee, a bag with breakfast sandwiches, and a blanket, and she was smiling at me like I was a person worth smiling at. Dorothy spoke up then, her voice steady now. I was the church secretary. I arrived early every morning to prepare for services and handle administrative work. I'd seen Mr. Harvey's car parked there for 3 nights in a row. On the 3rd morning I saw him through the frosted windows shivering, and I knew he was living in that car. She knocked on my window, Steve said, his voice breaking again. And when I rolled it down, embarrassed, ashamed, ready to be told to move along, you know what she said? He looked at Dorothy. She said, "Good morning, sir. I brought you some breakfast. Would you like to come inside where it's warm?" The tears were flowing freely down Steve's face now. Nobody had treated me with dignity in months. Nobody had looked at me like I was a human being worth caring about. But this woman, this angel, she treated me like I mattered. Dorothy continued the story. I brought him inside to the church kitchen. I made him a proper hot breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, everything we had. And while he ate, we talked. He told me about his comedy, about his dreams, about his children, about how he was ready to give up. "And you told me something," Steve interjected, looking at Dorothy with deep gratitude. "You told me something that changed my life. Do you remember what you said?" Dorothy nodded, tears in her eyes again. I said, "Mr. Harvey, God doesn't give us dreams just to watch us abandon them. If you have a gift, you have a responsibility to see it through. The tough times aren't a sign to quit. They're preparation for what's coming." Those words, Steve said, turning to the audience, Those words saved my life. But this woman didn't just give me words. For the next 4 days while I finished my shows at that comedy club, she brought me food every morning. She let me shower in the church bathroom. She washed my clothes. She gave me money for gas. And on my last day in Cleveland, she gave me something else. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, faded envelope. She gave me this. He held it up for the cameras to see. Inside this envelope was $300. Every dollar she had in her savings account. The studio gasped. Dorothy was shaking her head humbly. "I told you not to pay it back to me," she said softly. "I told you to pay it forward when your time came." "I tried to refuse it," Steve said. "But you wouldn't take no for an answer. You told me that money would get me to my next gig, that it was a loan from God, not from you. And you made me promise one thing." "I made you promise," Dorothy said, "that when you made it, when you became successful, you would never forget what it felt like to have nothing, and that you would help others the way I helped you." "I made that promise," Steve said, his voice firm now, "and I've kept it. Every charitable thing I've done, every scholarship I've given, every person I've helped, it all comes back to you, Dorothy. You were my angel when I needed one most." He turned to the audience. "I left Cleveland that week, and I kept going. I kept doing comedy, and slowly, things started to turn around. I got better gigs, made more money, started appearing on TV, and every step of the way I tried to find Dorothy Chen, the church secretary from Cleveland, to thank her properly. But I couldn't find her. The church had closed down a few years after I was there. I contacted everyone I could think of in Cleveland, but nobody knew where. She'd gone. I hired private investigators, but they came up empty. I posted on social media, offered a reward for information, but nothing. It was like you'd vanished." Dorothy explained after the church closed. "I moved to California to be closer to my daughter. I remarried, became Dorothy Chen instead of Dorothy Williams. I worked as a librarian until I retired 5 years ago. I've lived a quiet life. I don't use social media. I didn't even know you were looking for me until my granddaughter showed me one of your posts a few years ago." "Why didn't you reach out?" Steve asked, the question he'd been dying to ask for years. "Why didn't you let me find you?" Dorothy's answer was simple and profound. "Because I didn't do it for recognition, Mr. Harvey. I did it because God put you in my path, and I did what any decent person should do. You don't need to thank me. Watching you succeed, watching you help others, watching you use your platform for good, that's all the thanks I need. You kept your promise. That's what matters." Steve shook his head. "But you deserve to be thanked. You deserve to be honored for what you did." "And now I am being honored," Dorothy said with a gentle smile. "Here, today, in front of all these people. God's timing is perfect, isn't it? You've spent 27 years looking for me. And today, randomly, on a day I decided to surprise my granddaughter by coming to a taping of her favorite show, here we are." Steve let out a laugh through his tears. "Your granddaughter's favorite show?" Dorothy nodded. "She loves Family Feud. She's in the audience here too, 3rd row, right next to where I was sitting. That's Melissa. She insisted I come with her when she got tickets. She has no idea about any of this. She doesn't know the connection between us." The episode that aired 2 weeks later became the most watched Family Feud episode of all time. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions were moved by the story of a church secretary who gave everything she had to a struggling comedian, and the comedian who never forgot her kindness. It became more than a television moment. It became a reminder of what really matters. Not fame or fortune or success, but kindness, connection, gratitude, and the sacred responsibility to help others the way we've been helped. 27 years after Dorothy knocked on a car window on a freezing February morning, everything came full circle. And in that moment, Steve Harvey reminded all of us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change someone's entire life.